Okay, so we've been hearing a lot, I know you've been listening in on the sessions earlier on as well, talking about the current state of marketing effectiveness and what needs to change. Martin, what has struck you from this morning's session so far?
Well, I think what struck me most of all, Naga, is just, this is a glass half full issue for me. I sort of constantly hear marketeers and agency people sort of feeling that they're disenfranchised and sidelined in the bigger debate about what contribution they're making to the business. My message on all these occasions is always, never has there been a need for what marketing delivers as there is now. Fran name-checked me earlier on this macho metric of organic growth, organic sales growth. I cannot tell you how closely watched that metric is by people like me, analysts in the city. And if it's not marketing who's delivering organic growth through branding and innovation, then who is? So the positive message is you matter very much. Never has there been more fertile territory for a conversation about marketing effectiveness. That would be my message.
Okay, and we'll hope to take advantage of it as well. Matt?
I think in the first session, I was quite interested in listening to what Richard was talking about. He also mentioned Cadbury trying to control the internet during the Olympics, which I wasn't aware we tried to do, so I'll have to pick him up on that one. And if we did, could we do it again? Because it sounded like a great strategy. And Richard Cole's also, him talking about brand purpose almost in the way things have gone in through him and the stuff that's relevant to him. So I think those are the two themes that I found very interesting from the first session. In the broader thing about effectiveness, I'd probably agree. I often find I'm having to defend the client view around this area because I think we've been through a journey of 7 or 8 years now of trying to understand the effectiveness and the role of marketing beyond just keeping people in marketing busy. And we're seeing the results of that. We're increasing our advertising spend. We're increasing the partners that we work with. And we're doing a balance of short-term and long-term work as well. And so I'm always a little bit confused by the sort of, as I said, sort of this glass half empty view about the world and the way advertising and effectiveness is moving, because it's certainly not the case that I'm seeing.
Okay, Kate, what struck you?
I think what I'm really interested in is the link between, I guess, culture and kind of metrics and effectiveness. And certainly, I can use this as an example. One of the things I often ask my clients when they come to us with ambitions for what they want their advertising to achieve, and often they'll come with a view about saying, we want to do this, we want to do this, we want to do this. And the question I always ask is, if you could pick one metric to judge its effectiveness by, what would that be? And that for me is usually very interesting because it tells you a huge amount about the culture of that organisation and just how much it values effectiveness or creativity. So to just give you a kind of couple of examples, I have one client who came with a view that they wanted loads of emotion imbued into their advertising, and that was terribly important. And then when you say, well, what's the one metric that really matters? Their answer is, well, increase traffic to the website, please, which tells you something very different about that organisation. And at the other end of the spectrum, I've had clients say, actually, this is about raising the bar for our staff. So actually, if the marketing leads the way, and they see that and they can be inspired by it, that will lift everybody else's performance. And that tells you that you're talking about a very sort of different attitude to effectiveness and culture. So for me, those two things are really interesting because you will never win a battle about effectiveness if you don't understand the culture of an organisation. And I think that's a really interesting point.
Matt, do you get that right?
Do we get it right? Sometimes. I think when we work with partners who, the point you made there about understanding the culture of the organisation. So in our organisation, fundamentally, we are a manufacturer of millions and millions of chocolate bars, biscuits, products that people love to eat, love to talk about. But there's lots of issues in terms of customers, distribution, price, and we don't own the point of sale. But listening early on, if you work in insurance or price comparison or something else, you can see the journey through to the point and the value of each consumer. So there's some disconnects for us in terms of making the advertising, getting the message out there, and then it leading to a sale or an action. So I think there are some areas where we do get it very well. And there are certain parts of our business where we do need a short term, we do need an immediate response. If we're doing stuff for Christmas, for Easter, for new products, we need to get a message out, we need to get people to go out and buy it and try it quite quickly. But we also have a balance of also longer-term brand building and the equity of that. Now, we're still trying to find out the best ways of doing that, and we had a big new comms strategy started this year, which feels like we're going in the right direction. But it's, you know, we've had 4 or 5 years of really struggling with that part of it, but I think we're now starting to make some progress on it.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that, because Martin, I want to pick up on the whole theme of short-termism that we were talking about, that was mentioned this morning, and whether or not it's harmful at the moment, and how harmful it can be, and there's been a lot of talk about that. What do you think can be done about it?
Well, I'd make a couple of points on it. One is the world of finance, people like me, as short-termist as we're made out to be? I could bore you all morning with evidence, which you won't give me time to do. But I mean, you know, let me just say straight away, there's not, you know, surely if the world was short-term, then big branded consumer goods companies would be cutting A&P to sales ratios. I mean, you've heard from Matt that Mondelez aren't, and frankly, nobody else is. Unilever are taking their spend a little bit down, but that's because they're cutting the word that the IPA hates, non-working media. They're not cutting consumer-facing investment. So I slightly refute that there's this short-term culture. I think we in finance give a very good impression of being short-term because men shout into phones and share prices move up and down a lot. But the actual substantial evidence for whether the financial world is short-term, I don't know. One more, Naga, if I may. I think the constantly having this tedious debate about short-term versus long-term is slightly, I think, getting in the way of making some progress. Let's have a debate about shared accountability and responsibility at the high level, and then let's have the debate about how we talk about the short-term and long-term within. I'm just seriously bored with short-term versus long-term, to be blunt with you.
Okay, well, have some coffee just for the next minute or so. Kate, because Kate, well, I think Kate's going to disagree with you.
I am going to disagree with you.
Yes, go on, Kate.
So I think there is short-term quarterly reporting is a kind of normal thing now, right? So we spent a long time, I think, in agency world, certainly, sort of pushing against it and saying, this is bad, this is bad, this is bad. Because if we all optimize around short-term metrics, then we've got lots of data from the IPA and evidence that suggests that that is harmful for long-term profit growth. And so there's been a kind of pushback against it. But I do think, you know, we're slightly living in a dream world if we think that the sort of tyranny of short-term reporting is going to go away. It's not going to go away. It's here to stay. And I think actually it's incumbent on us to help clients figure out how do you balance those things. You know, and I do think actually there has been if not a shift in total investment, and you'll know, you know, from looking at your numbers if that's the case or not, but certainly we see a movement towards the type of media that favours short-term response. And certainly if you look at the entries to the IPA Effectiveness Awards, I think Burnett and Field have shown that the vast majority of those have moved towards a kind of much shorter term in terms of the impact that they're looking to demonstrate. So I do think there is a move towards short-term metrics. I do think that arguably that is harmful for the long-term growth of the brands that we are supposed to be in service to. But I think we are stupid if we think we're going to sort of suddenly turn the clock back. So we have to find a way forward to kind of balance these two things.
And someone has asked Martin, regarding your thoughts on quarterly reporting, would effectiveness be greater without it?
I'm not convinced it would. I mean, let's just be very particular at the moment on so-called quarterly reporting. In the US, companies report quarterly sales and profit. So clearly there is the temptation there to cut the budget to make the quarterly number. But that's not the case in Europe. You know, Unilever and Diageo and people like that report half-yearly. So they report sales quarterly. But this sort of mythology, I remember when I was put on the Quaker Oats account in 1983 or something, the account director said to me, welcome to the Quaker Oats account, Martin. Don't get too excited about it because they'd always cut the budget in the fourth quarter to make the numbers. And I think that myth persists. But if you're not reporting profits quarterly, we, the analysts, don't know what you're doing with your marketing budget in the quarter. You can do what you like with it. We're only seeing the sales numbers. So I just slightly refute this. What do you think about it? Sorry.
No, that's fine.
Hijacking the agenda here. Naga, sorry.
No, it's
Don't
absolutely
upset Naga.
No.
Carry on, you're doing
Well, how do Mondelez feel about it? Because you do quarterly reports.
We do
of course,
quarterly
to Wall
reports.
Street.
Yes, we do. So we're obviously American owned.
So do you slash the budget to make the quarter?
Absolutely, every quarter. Don't give us a brief in quarter four. Always put it in Q1. Loads of money coming through. No, ironically, partly because so much of the business, it's just the season, so Christmas is really important to us, so we were stupid to pull out loads of budget at that time of the year because it's a real key time, not probably even just for chocolate, lots of sales in FMCG go at that point, so whereas you might want to shift more Quaker in January when people are being a bit more healthy, I don't know. But and actually, I've actually had the incident where we've increased the budget in Q4. So because when you have that magical conversation, it doesn't happen very often, but it has happened at least once, where they say, we've got the latest ROI results, we've got $1 million extra to spend, and we're going to spend it in the UK because we've seen the latest ROI results and we can see that we can get a return. We've got a big uplift in sales in those last 4 weeks of the year, and we can get more of them by putting more behind the media that you are doing. And we know it can measure an effect. Now, before we had evaluation, before we had effectiveness and measurement, how would you make that decision about we've got some more money to spend, where are we going to put it? And that's I gotta say, just to warn you, it's very rare, but it has happened at least once. So what a benefit from it.
I think, so I take the point that there might not be in every company a formal requirement to report quarterly, but I think certainly what I've seen with some of the clients that we work with is the mentality of looking at, which is not a bad thing. Obviously, you want to see how the progress that you're making every quarter, but what that means often is budgets are rarely signed off for more than a quarter or sometimes 6 months ahead of time, which means it's really hard to plan for the kind of mid to long term. So I think, to go back to the theme I was saying before, this is about the impact of these metrics on the culture of an organisation and how it thinks and how it approaches its view of brands and of long-term growth for them. And that's, I suppose, the thing that I struggle with constantly.
But my pushback to you and to the whole audience is, how would you run a business? How do you run your personal affairs? If you went into your boss tomorrow and he cut your pay by 10%, would you keep the gym membership going? You naturally, as business conditions change, you flex your model to adapt to those conditions. Of course, there's a long-term imperative. There's a view about where the business is going and the sort of level of investment it needs to make. But it's just common sense that you have to flex that. And in general, in the world I know, in mainstream consumer goods that are sold in supermarkets, the business climate has got, broadly speaking, worse and more difficult. So when the chief executive of Premier Foods tells me, he did a meeting a year ago, that aggregate advertising expenditure in the UK food industry had fallen in the first half of the year by 30%. You don't just keep spending, because Les will tell us, I think I can see him there, that you spend share of voice, don't you, Les? So if industry aggregate expenditure is going down, then to maintain your share of voice, you spend less.
But you still need a long-term objective. So
of course you do.
You use the personal example.
Yeah.
Yes, if my pay was cut by 10%, it doesn't change the fact that I would want to have a house or to pay off my mortgage or to have a holiday in 2 years. I still have long-term objectives that I'd want to still work towards.
Absolutely. But you have to just make the short-term versus long-term trade-offs to get there.
But you have to balance them, yeah. Yeah, no, you have to balance it. And I think sometimes because we can now get so much data to monitor short-term performance, it's become a case, I think, of it, we look at and we become obsessed with the metrics that are easy to measure rather than the longer-term ones, which are harder to measure. And I admit it's not easy tying slow-moving long-term brand metrics to the bottom line, and I think we have a huge responsibility as an industry to do a better job of that so that actually we can figure out what to cut in the short term and how to balance those short and long-term perspectives.
Does not much of this come down also to the information you have? You're talking about the metrics, talking about data. In an age of big data, of course, it's about getting hold of the right data as well. And do you think that both sides are getting it right in terms of what they're asking for and what's being delivered, Kate?
So I think it depends very much, again, on the culture of the organisation. I think some companies are very generous with their data. I'm sometimes staggered by companies that because I'm slightly data obsessed and insight obsessed, so I ask for a lot of data, and have sometimes had people say, well, why do you want to know? Why do you need to know, all of these sort of metrics? To which the answer is because it will help me understand your business better. And if I understand your business better, hopefully I can do my job better. So I think we're not always getting the right set of data, and actually, more importantly, I think we're not always analysing it in the right way. So I think we spend a huge amount of time collecting data and reporting it, and not enough time or not enough effort goes into really understanding what it's telling us. Because actually, I think you could do a lot with the existing data sets if we look at them differently and more smartly.
Matt?
Yeah, sorry, I was just reflecting a little bit on Martin alienating the panel and everybody else in the room, so I didn't know whether I should move a little bit further over here.
Martin, I still like you, don't
Oh,
worry.
all right. I'll be your friend
Thank you,
again,
I
Martin.
appreciate
All right,
that.
we're in. It's no good having a panel, everyone agrees with each other. So on the question of data, we are still obviously beholden to market share, standard measures of penetration, and from a finance point of view, sales and shipments out, so we know broadly what the stuff is happening. And obviously as a manufacturer, you're also balancing the cost of goods and information and that sort of stuff coming in. So what's interesting is that for what is relative to the size of sales that we make, the investment in marketing, for example, the amount of data that's available for really it's a very, very small part of the drivers of our business is astronomical. So it's very, very important for us to understand what data we are using, being careful about how we use it and how we apply it. And the only kind of advice that we tend to look at it is just to try and make a decision up front about which metrics we're going to look at and stick with them, even if they get slightly out of date, or something, there's a better way of doing this. We can use social listening with an algorithm-based, et cetera, et cetera. You've already switched off by the time the person's finished explaining it to you, as opposed to a system of measurement where we use the same method, we look across countries, look across categories in the same way, and allows us to compare. And probably, I would say, the biggest breakthrough we've had, it's just a real simple thing, was to stop looking at the absolute value, say of ROI, for example, whether it was 2 or 3 or whatever, and just forget about the absolute level, and just look at, as long as you're measuring it in the same way, is it getting better or is it getting worse? What were the things that we were doing? What were the levers we were shifting? It's usually not massive changes that you're going to suddenly see things dramatically improve. It's all about incremental gains. And that's kind of helped move the conversation away from comparison, from kind of marking homework, from battles between categories, because biscuits, or let's say take Philadelphia cheese, it's more difficult to drive massive uplifts in sales and therefore great ROIs compared to an Easter MPD product, for example. So I think one thing has been, the key thing is consistency of data over time in the way you measure, and also looking at comparison and trend as opposed to the absolute values that you're getting, and that's what we try and focus on.
Martin.
I think just picking up some of the points that Libby made about one of the issues that troubles me as a former advertising manager, I think my sense is, and I'm not close to the coalface these days of what agencies are doing, but I think the data flow to agencies has got poorer, and I think that's a shame. I think 2 things happened just as I was leaving the industry at the turn of the 90s that were unfortunate. One was the splitting of creative and media, and I think the response of the media agencies to sort of reposition themselves as sort of marketing intelligence houses meant that the data all started flowing to the media agencies, and I think the creative agencies were somewhat starved of it and left in a sort of data-free zone. I think secondly, agency tenures started to go down. Agencies got churned more and more. I think clients probably started to perceive that the agency wasn't any longer a partner and someone that could be trusted with confidential data. So my world, Naga, sort of just after the war was, we had, the AGB data, as it was called then, now Kantar would arrive in the big ring binders and I would dutifully pore over it. I'm not making this up. And, would worry about market share and penetration. I would just, like it or not, there weren't any KPIs, but there was a lot of real accountability, actually. We would do weight tests in different regions and sort of weigh up the results. And it was just a lot of science and accountability just going on very sort of almost effortlessly. And my sense is that's sort of gone, and I think that's a shame.
I'm going to ask you one more thought, because I have 6 seconds. One thought you would like your opposite number to think about to make your lives and your relationships easier. What don't they see? What are they seeing? Aren't they seeing enough of to make life easier?
Not speaking the language of finance well enough.
Not speaking the language of finance well enough. Matt?
I'm trying to make a nice sort of tweetable sentence. Understanding that we're a manufacturer of chocolate and biscuits, not a media advertising company.
Understand you're a manufacturer of biscuits, not a media advertising
Exactly.
company. Kate?
I think not putting risk and creativity in the same sentence.
Oh, I wish I said that.
Okay. Kate, Martin, Matt, thank you very much. Please thank you. And thank you for your questions. I will get to them. Thank you very much. Thank you.